Hi, I'm Dr. Adam Fields. I'm a chiropractor and I am excited about movement. I've got Les Raymond here today. He has a YouTube channel called The Mindful Movement where he goes through meditations and movement exercises, breathing exercises, things that all of us need, all of us are lacking. He has a history in movement. When this guy talks about movement, I just want to move. I'm inspired. His words become flesh and movement and activation in our bodies. So let's talk to Les. Les, great to see you. Tell me about mindful movement. What is mindful movement?
Well, Adam, thank you for having me on. It's good to see you. As you know, I'm a big fan of yours too. So, the mindful movement was actually started by my wife, Sarah. So, she is the main voice on the mindful movement, and it's primarily guided meditations. It's a channel that kind of came about almost by accident, and then it's kind of taken off. But we've both been movement practitioners for quite some time. So we have brick and mortar studios.
Hmm.
So my wife spent a long time running a Pilates studio, and then I run kind of a small gym with a personal training focus.
I did Pilates this morning. I mean, we're on
Oh,
it.
okay, great. So the mindful movement is, it's an oasis. It's a place where there's a lot of things to take in. Again, primarily it's guided meditation. So like when you need a break in your day and you like the support of a guide through your meditative practice, you just put headphones in and zone out and kind of
Hmm.
recover, rejuvenate. But we also have like mindfulness based tips. We have movement videos,
Hmm.
and they're all generally on the easy side for folks,
Great.
and more of nourishing movement strategies. And
It's
then also, I
interesting,
run a podcast, as you know, as you've been a
right?
guest on.
I was on it. Right. It's interesting you mentioned like it's the mindful movement, but there's a part of movement is stopping, right? It's
Yeah,
not just because if we just keep moving and moving and moving and moving, we have to unwind. I see that in the Silicon Valley. So many guys here and people are here and they're just there's too much movement and too much stress. And then their muscles just get tight. They're easy. I even have, we have a physical therapist in our office that works with pelvic floor exercises
oh, busy
and pelvic
person.
floor stuff. And these guys, literally, you'll have CEOs that come in that have moved and been too tense, and they have to catheterize themselves to go to the bathroom
Oh
because they
wow.
haven't stopped. They haven't checked into the mindful movement and done that relaxation, that reset. I think stopping is a part of movement.
Yeah, and breathing is kind of the foundation movement. So when you're speaking about the pelvic floor, that mechanism is set in place originally through us, practicing breathing how we've basically been designed to breathe. And then, once you're like 3 or 4 years old and you start to adapt to these environments that are kind of new on the scene, primarily like chairs and desks,
Mm.
those mechanics change and we're always adapting to our environment. It's not a switch that we could just turn on when we're going to the gym, it's just always in process. So the environments that we spend a lot of time on, we start to mold to, and that definitely affects breathing mechanics. It affects all aspects of our life. It affects how your brain works, how your eyes work,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, the
hormonal
brain.
imbalances.
It's interesting that there's a you know what a sea cucumber is or a sea squirt.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I'd go scuba diving and see these little guys and we play on it with them and stuff. They have a 300 neuron brain, and
Wow.
they have this life cycle where they're cruising along on the floor of the ocean, and at some point they say, okay, I'm just going to connect, and they connect to the floor of the ocean, and they don't move anymore. And at that point, they don't need their brain anymore. They literally cannibalize it. They eat that 300 neuron brain, and because really movement, like you're saying, nourishes the brain. You know, the greatest part of our gray matter is there for mechanics. It's not immunological function. It's not heart function. It's not thinking or emotions. It's movement. And you probably know this, but those movement pathways, those proprioceptors, mechanoreceptors, create highways that other other signals go down, like problem solving, sleep, rewarding yourself when you do something good, mathematics, whatever it is. And so movement nourishes the whole highway system. And
Yeah.
other
And
guys,
I think it starts actually while we're still in the womb, and the vestibular system is just initially being developed, and we're like sloshing around in the womb in a big, you know, pool of liquid, and
Right.
all that movement is bringing information to our brain.
Right.
Pretty
Absolutely. There's
wild
this
stuff.
chiropractor, Dr. Dan Murphy. He's been chiropractor of the year forever. He's an amazing guy, and been published many times. And he has videos of his wife. They have this high ceiling in their living room, and she's 8 months pregnant. They put a full size trampoline in their living room, and she's jumping
Yeah.
up and down with this thing. And this kid turned out to be a genius. But the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, also.
Right. Yeah, one thing I like to do, you know, movement is a really broad topic. And one thing that I think goes overlooked as people talk about it is just like defining it. Because, you know, we go through life and it's like this understood thing. We know that we do it all the time, but sometimes we don't pause to think what it actually is. And I've definitely spent hours and hours just kind of racking my brain trying to put into words, you know, what it actually
Define movement.
is you know, trying to stay as objective as possible to what I consider reality. And I come down to this idea that it's essentially the transfer of energy in the form of force through the body.
Mm.
Now, most people have some like preconceived idea of like what a movement practice should be and what exercise is, but we, you know, we don't stop to think like what direction does that idea point to and what's the context around it. And I've been really fortunate. I wasn't always into movement. I used to be a pretty unhealthy guy. I was topping 240 pounds,
Mm.
never really exercised. Um, and then kind of went down a rabbit hole of uh, like running races. I've done like 35 triathlons. And then after all of that, I started to actually learn about movement.
So
And I got,
you were eating poorly. You were out of shape. You weren't feeling good, and something clicked. What clicked? Because so many people need to know that. I mean,
well,
how
it's
many people
funny.
are just
So
stuck and their
my
wheels are
wife had
spinning?
actually sent me a message. She signed me up for a 5K. And normally I would have been like really angry about that. But I think deep down I knew I needed a change, and I'm really grateful that, you know, she did that.
Mm.
And what happened was I went out and started practicing running, and I made it maybe a half a mile, and you know, I thought I was going to die.
Oh,
So
that's
out of
fun.
shape, like lungs burning. But then like every other day I would just go out and do it again.
Hmm.
And after about 3 months, I ran this 5K, and I wasn't fast or anything, but I learned a lot along the way, and I had lost some weight along the way. And then I got a little OCD. Like I was afraid to stop. So I looked, I'm living in an area where there's a huge racing community. So there's always a race going on. So I started to just book the next race. So I always had a race on the calendar. So I always had a reason to today or tomorrow to just get out and practice.
Mm.
And my father-in-law was into triathlons when he was younger. And I remember he would watch like the Tour de France. He was big into cycling, and I started getting inspired by the bike. So I got on the bike, and then I got in the pool, and then for
Mm.
like 6 or 7 years, I did tons of triathlons.
Mm.
And at that
What
point,
what happened? At that point, you're okay. You're explaining the action, but what's happening mentally? What's happening with your diet? How are you changing as a
so I
person?
was still eating like a lot of crap, but I
Really?
was adding some real food. So like
Okay.
I would start to, at least for dinner, have, you know, reasonable whole foods where I would consciously like put a piece of salmon on the plate, some rice, some vegetable. I would still eat maybe fast food for lunch.
Mm.
Like, I mean, I grew up on the sad diet for sure. And I had a long history with drugs and alcohol too, which probably didn't help.
Hmm.
Um, and so I started to like slowly climb out of this big hole, this like health deficit that I had built for myself. And it was slow, but it was like consistent. I just kept chugging along. And then I got lucky. So when I was racing, I made a friend with an elite athlete who was also doing triathlon. And in triathlon, he was like an elite runner, so I couldn't really hang with him on foot, but I could hang with him with the other two events. So like once a week we would get together to train. It'd be like his slow day and I would like hang on for dear life. He was like a near Olympic level runner. I
You're
think he ran a
gagging and
four.
puking and cleaning
Yeah,
out the
he was like a
pipes and
408 miler
oh
in
yeah, yeah.
college, but he was also a highly skilled manual therapist, like a certified functional manual therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be times where after training, he'd put his hands on me to address some type of symptom that was arising out of the training. And it was very eye opening. It was like a glimpse into the abyss of the human body and
Mm,
like how fingers on my first rib could affect my low back and how everything was connected and related. And I started to just really want to know more. So then I started to really broaden my education on movement, and I got really lucky. I got introduced to some of the greatest minds in movement. I'm lucky because of where I am location wise. Some of them were not that far away. And I just entrenched myself learning everything I could about movement quality and strength training. And that really changed my course quite a bit.
mm.
And then eventually I opened up my own gym where I got to really put in practice what I've been learning and try to help others. And that's really was like a home and a sanctuary for me.
Right. And you had a compassion for people too because you were there. You know what it's like. You know what it's like to look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, I'm not really liking what's going on here, you know. Right. That's a
Yeah, and
true
I
test.
love the transformation. Like I love helping somebody make big change. Like it's very easy to take someone that has been exercising their whole life. They live a pretty healthy lifestyle, and they want to get a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a little bit leaner. But my passion was someone that was dealing with maybe obesity or chronic illness,
Mm-hmm.
and dramatically change their state of health by teaching them and facilitating an environment to inspire them to really change the way they compose the minutes of their day and the way they look at how
Mm,
they use their time, and then let that transformation just take place.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's fun
It's a mission.
for sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I have people like that in my office. I can't handle I couldn't handle an office full of 400-pound people, but I have them coming in and I just loving on them and inspiring them as much as I possibly can and seeing that happen. And then I'll get out like, dumbbells and I'll put it in their hand. I go, okay, 20 pounds, feel that. You were carrying that around, If I told you to carry this around in a backpack for a week, would you do it? You think, oh, come on, are you crazy? But you've been carrying that around for years, right? And now it's gone, right? So it is so inspiring to see that happen.
Yeah, I remember from one point I went from 240 to 153 to my lowest. And like I would go pick up that kind of weight differential and just it's hard to imagine that used to be
Right.
part of you. And it
Right.
wasn't muscle, it was
Yeah. Just extra
it was
baggage.
fat. Yeah, extra baggage. And
Yeah.
so you learn a lot along that way. And that got me just very passionate about the ideas around a movement practice and helping people incorporate a movement practice into their life, which a lot of people are used to. Like if you're used to going to the gym, but there's some things that I just feel like have been missing in like the common spaces of exercise.
Mm.
And one is context, meaning like what are the qualities, what are the ideas within the movements that we do practice? Like where do they arise from? Why do they exist? And the direction in which programs point. And that for some reason is just missing. Like in the corporate world, people are used to like forecasting. So like let's say a company does, we did $50 million this year, and then you have this meeting, at the end of the year, beginning of the year, where you're kind of planning what's the goal this year. Oh, well, maybe 60 million. So you kind of work backwards of what you need to do today
Mm-hmm.
to move in that direction. But for some reason with our health, we don't pause and identify like where we're going.
Right.
Like
Right.
where's the goal here? And then once you even identify that, you have this balancing act of negotiating an attachment to that goal or being able to like build a relationship with yourself and embrace a process that just aims towards that goal. And those are two very different things. One that could create a lot of internal conflict between the right ear and the left ear, and one that could set you up for a really enjoyable lifestyle.
Mm.
So I like teaching those ideas and then helping people, what's the step you take today to be moving in alignment with what you identify as something that you really care about.
Right. And I find that, also it's like temporary goals. Let's say your goal is to lose 100 pounds and you lose 50 pounds. Well, 50% of your motivation is gone because you chose a motivation that was temporary. If your goal, there was a psychiatrist, he was in psychologist over in Marin County near us, and these guys were skateboarding outside his office, and he had this beautiful little office, and he loved it, and they're just hitting rail slides, and he didn't like it, so he goes out there and he says, "Hey, listen, you guys are doing great. I love this. This is a while ago, so $1 was more, but he goes, I'm going to give you guys $1 every day you come out here." So for a month, he gives them $1. Here's your dollar. Thanks so much for coming out. Thanks for coming out. And these guys are stoked. They're getting money. They're doing something they love. And then about 6 weeks in, he says, this month I'm just not making as much money. I'm not going to be able to give you the dollar anymore, right? And so they leave, right? What he did is he switched the motivation, right? It became from this lasting intrinsic motivation to something that was temporary, and then he took that motivation away, right? Just like the motivation of weight loss, for instance, or I've got to fit into that wedding dress or something like that.
Yeah.
My wife always says that the thinnest a woman's going to be is on her wedding day, right? And but if you have a lasting motivation, I want to be there for my grandkids. I want to give my family the legacy of health. As they get older, I want to dance at that wedding when I'm 80, rather than being the guy that's sitting in the chair. I want to be a person that is, you can give your kids a bunch of money when you die, but if you give them health and vitality in your senior years, it's way better than any financial gain, right?
Oh, for
So
sure. And
there's
most people, if you ask enough questions, most people kind of agree that ultimately they want the same thing. Like they want to live as well as they can for as long as they can.
right.
So like, we don't like the excess weight. We want to lose the 20 pounds. But when you realize that's just a symptom of a lack of well-being on some level, and you embrace a process of well-being, those symptoms usually just work themselves out. But when you're focused on those, like you said, if you don't miss it, if you get half of it, you create kind of a false sense of failure,
Mm.
which isn't like real. It's just, construct of your mind. Like you had a goal and you missed it.
Hmm.
And that you just created a problem out of thin air.
Wow. I always looked
Uh,
at it as a false sense of like a false sense of failure or a false sense of accomplishment, even.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the
Yeah.
flip side, the same coin,
Hmm.
and it goes like it shows up in all types of places. Like a guy will come in to the gym, and let's say when they were in college, they could do a dozen pull-ups, and my goals, and they come in, I want to be able to do a dozen pull-ups. So what I could do in college, I want to get back to my college self.
Mm.
And what happens is if the mind is on that is attached to a goal like that, let's say you can do, I don't know, 7 pull-ups, but when you're doing that seventh one, you feel like a little twinge in your shoulder, but you don't really listen because you have this goal. You're
Mm.
attached to this outcome of, reversing time in some way and being able to do what you did when you're younger. So maybe you attempt another rep. And then before you know it, like you're in a chiropractor's office. You're no longer practicing pull-ups.
Right.
You're off track. And that's okay. Like if you take your training seriously, you're going to have bumps on the road, but ideally they're going to be little lessons. Like if you
Hmm.
um I remember when I used to trail run, like once a year I'd roll my right ankle, and I'd get so angry. And like if you take a runner away out of their ability to run, they get depressed. They're like reliant. They're addicted to those hormones and the chemicals that their body's making during that practice. And it took me years to realize like maybe this is telling me something. Like what's the lesson here? Which like ultimately for me probably was to build more unilateral motor control, like more like stability
Mm-hmm.
on one leg at a time, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of what happens
Hello.
when you run. So, in doing that, I no longer rolled my right ankle.
I had the
So,
same thing with my left. I was,
oh,
and then after chiropractic school, I was in Guatemala. I was working at the base of a volcano and it was all cobblestone streets. And I was rolling that ankle, putting it into these fountains in the middle of the park and, working with the indigenous people. And they were just so wonderful and tending to me. And I had the same realization. And so I was brushing my teeth with an electric toothbrush and I would just balance and close my eyes for, it was a 2-minute toothbrush and just balance on that leg. And I did it for a good year, and I've never rolled my ankle again. Right? It's just a little like, hey, I need some help. Your innate intelligence is calling you up and saying, I need some help up down here. And when people go out and they do after I work on them, and they go, oh, I flared up. I go, oh, this is great. It's revealing what your body needs. Now we
yeah,
give it that attention. Let's push it. Let's rev that engine a little bit and see where your body might fail a little bit. Where did you fail? How do we tend to that? Let's find that weakest link.
yeah, yeah. Weakest link. That's where you kind of move the needle the most it's very easy to not listen to those signals and then never go down that path. But yeah, so ultimately, we all generally want the same thing. And what I like to do is teach people to identify what are the qualities that go into what we ultimately want. So, like when we talk about, let's say, longevity or quality of life, like the direction in which your practice points or your lifestyle points, where you're an organism and you want to be a high functioning organism for as long as you can.
Right.
There's certain qualities that we could identify, and even though there's overlap with them, the ability to compartmentalize them to some degree is useful. It's a useful strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, like when you think about the qualities that keep someone out of a nursing home, like most people have been in a nursing home and kind of looked around and you kind of see what's going on there. And people are generally in there because either like a disease from either something that's cumulative lifestyle or an inability to respond to stress or repair DNA or repair cells, or really they're like just not strong enough.
Mm.
They're not strong enough to power themselves through their day, so they need assistance in doing so.
Right. They purchased the lazy boy that just they hit the button and it gets them up.
All right.
Um, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I live. My mom lives with us, and when we started working out a little bit together, and when she first started to come here and live with us, she wasn't getting on and off the floor. I'm like, no, 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 we're on and off the floor every day, right? And now she pops right up, but she had lost that. It was a blind spot, you
But
know.
you get it back. So how old was she when she started practicing to get it back?
Oh gosh, she's got a story. I mean, you'll like this. So she was when I was about 7 years old. She was in a body surfing accident in Hawaii, and she came down with intractable back pain, and this was basically defined my childhood. She was down at one point for 6 years. She didn't see our kitchen, and I would come home from school at 11 years old, give her a shot of morphine, empty the bedpan. She had my brother was a chiropractor, much older than I am. I'm the youngest of seven. She had me when she was quite old, and she basically my brother was saying, if it hurts, don't do it, and the medical doctor was saying, if it hurts, take more drugs, right? So she ends up bedridden, right? Didn't come to my eighth grade graduation, came to my high school graduation, but was very drugged up. Had multiple surgeries in there, saw about 25 chiropractors. We went to the Philippines and saw faith healers. I mean, we did it all. And this is a weird thing. I go to chiropractic school. I never thought I could help my mom. It never thought, okay, how would this relate to my mom? I thought my brother's the best chiropractor out there. She's seen my cousin's a chiropractor. My uncle's a medical doctor. I'm not going to be the guy. So I'm off in the sticks with my adjusting table on my back at the base of volcanoes, adjusting natives in Guatemala. And she sends me, she tries to get a hold of me. She says, I really need you. So I get on the next plane and I come back and I start to work on her a little bit, just listening to her innate and uh, reading her muscles, seeing what her body wants and adjusting there. And she starts to get a little bit better. And so I said, oh, okay, all right. I was securing a lease that day on a building. So I went back, I cut that off, came back, set up a practice right near her and my dad. And I said, okay, Mom, if we're going to do this, you gotta do everything I say, right? And like you, every part of the body, like you said, you put the fingers on the clavicle or whatever, the first rib, and it affects the low back. I believe everything affects everything else, right? At one point, they wanted to take her gallbladder out, and I said, you're not taking the gallbladder out. There's some connection between your low back and the gallbladder. I don't know what it is. And she says, I'll get a second opinion. So they said, the gallbladder's got to come out. I said, do you want the gallbladder or me? I'm leaving the country because I was going to go to Guatemala or Spain. And she says, okay. She stopped all fats and her gallbladder healed. She still has that gallbladder. So I saw this woman emerge, and I didn't. Where do we start? Right? We get her off the drugs, and then we start. Okay, I can move my hands this much. If I move it more than 10 times, it flares up my low back. Okay, we're gonna move it this much. You know, she was painting. Does beautiful oil painting on her back with the brushes and a Velcro, and connecting the brushes, and they had to be smaller works of art because she was lying down, and so it was pushing that movement. And I was a young chiropractor. I didn't have the knowledge I have now. Probably even so I was just had a philosophy of we need to move. We need to move through this. You're not injuring yourself. You're just experiencing some pain, right? And there's a big difference. And so I saw this woman emerge. This is a mom I never knew, and all of a sudden she started to have emotion. She would cry. She would, she emerged. So I felt like I was a puppet in God's hands, and every move was right. So now, fast forward, she's doing great. I mean, she's 90 years old, and
Oh, wow.
she balances on one leg, no problem, throwing a ball. She can do a deep squat with her butt below her knees and get all the way up and get on the floor, get back up again. And
That's
so
great.
there's a novel, there's a book, there's a TV
The body
series.
doesn't stop adapting. I
Right.
mean,
Even after
I,
years, 19 years of morphine and in bed, people can come back, and you've seen it and I've seen it, and we just have to start somewhere. And my definition of exercise is different than yours, which is different. Some people, their exercise might be just getting out of a chair, and we do that multiple times. You got to start where somebody needs to start.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, so a lot of people don't really know where to start,
sure.
and like what to work on. And there's only so much time in a week to work on it generally. So, the average person, if it's a little different if you don't have like a day job, but for most folks, you gotta fit it in somehow. And there's no solutions. There's only trade-offs.
Mm,
So the formula becomes like more important the less time you have to dedicate. So, for instance, if you only have, let's say, 2 or 3 hours a week, then you don't want to waste it. Whereas if you have maybe 10 or 12 hours a week, there's a little bit of more freedom there.
mm,
So the more constraints you have and the more parameters, like the more context you need. Otherwise, I don't want to say you're wasting time, but you won't really get the most benefit from your time in relationship to what the long-term goal probably is.
mm,
So, for instance, like in the nursing home example, you're generally not going to find someone in a nursing home because of like a lack of cardiac capacity or even aerobic capacity. Not that those qualities aren't useful, and they definitely can contribute to your quality of life, but they're generally not the lowest hanging fruit when you're trying to kind of check the boxes to keep your quality of life high.
Mm.
So, there's different ways to look at it. So one would be like how well you can move. And, I might label that competency or quality itself. So if you take movement from its raw form, that it's transferring force through the body, we have parameters in which we do that. So we have like space, we have gravity, we have earth, and then we have three planes that we move within: the sagittal, the frontal, and the transverse plane. So how well you move, or the competency, might relate to kind of how well do you navigate your body, how well do you transfer force through your body within those parameters. And in general, when you do that well, when I say well, I mean efficiently based on our design. Like the fact that we have two legs, two arms, one trunk, one neck, one head, we could look at the architecture and get a pretty good idea of how force is designed to be dispersed and sent through the body.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't do that efficiently, maybe due to postural issues, bad habits, injuries, traumas, whatever, even emotional or mental stuff,
Emotional, right?
you'll have like a little compensation, some type of compensatory strategy that arises, which over time will develop into some kind of symptom. So, like, that's a quality in itself. Like, how well can I navigate my body in space and reduce potential compensatory strategies?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would call that's like actually the second most important quality to work on. The first being how much force can you transfer through that body? And that would be commonly known as its strength. And if you add like a component of velocity to it, it might be lumped together with like power.
Force.
So that's what really moves the needle the most for most people. So when you're devising like a program, that's like the big meat and potato section, like strength and power, because it makes up for the most of the other qualities the most. And a lot of people say, well, like, I'm out of shape because when I go up a flight of steps, I'm out of breath. So I need to, work on my cardio. But that's generally a strength issue. Like if every step you take is maybe 40% of your capacity, well, when you take a dozen of them, you might feel a little winded at the top. But if it was 4% of your capacity, then you're not really phased by going up a dozen steps. So strength will show up in more places than people realize, or lack thereof. And it also takes generally the most time to work on, putting aside like some types of aerobic capacity training. So that's something that really needs to be nourished if you have that long-term goal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of like identifying the qualities that are built into the long-term goal, and then trying to divvy up your time so that it's proportionate to the things that basically ensure a higher quality of life later.
Right. So
So
moving your body through time, through space, mechanically sound, right? Without that proverbial rock in your shoe, or that short leg, or that
right,
compensatory mechanism, that scar tissue, that
right.
emotional pattern. You see a lot of emotional patterns like this, and then moving it through space with his least amount of effort, and then creating strength in that, right?
Yeah, and you could always like move more than you could move well. So there's a gentleman by the name of Gray Cook. He's the co-founder of the functional movement systems, and really a powerful mind in the movement world. And one thing that he's really done that's been amazing contribution to the movement field is he's made people observers of movement, where you start to actually try to assign uh, like a scoring system to the quality of movement. And one thing that he's pointed out that I've never seen fail is this idea of like this pyramid, meaning at the base of a pyramid is basically your competency. It's how well you move. And then this middle section of the pyramid is basically how much force can you move. So that is that strength and power. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the top of the pyramid is like a skill. And the skill could be like an exercise in the gym, it could be a backflip, it could be hitting a golf ball, it could be anything. The
Hmm.
key really is the shape of the pyramid. So the idea is you need enough competency to support the amount of force that you're generating and transferring and applying
Hmm.
through whatever skill, whatever pattern, whatever activity. So when that pyramid loses its shape is where you have like a problem. So for instance, you might be able to deadlift 200 pounds really well with no compensation. And at 250, even though you still can pick it up, maybe your right hip hikes a little bit, you lose control in one of those three planes that I mentioned, which eventually over time will show itself as some type of symptom or injury.
Hmm.
So,
Or you're
there's a bit
doing,
of an art form. What's
it's an
that?
art form, or you're doing an exercise that's a machine, right? And the machine is tracking your body and making it go through a certain range of motion. And correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like that type of thing, instead of the X, Y, and Z axis being available to a person through the movement, and they're controlling that axis, having a machine control it for them, which might be good for somebody in the beginning stages of exercise, but it might be creating too much force without the movement component. So you're going right to the middle part of the pyramid, and you're creating a strong, dumb movement in a way.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the nervous system runs the show. So a lot of the machines will take out a large part of the nervous system
Good way to
and
put
work parts in a more myopic approach. And unfortunately, we're kind of a machine in a way, and like we don't really move that way. They definitely can serve a useful purpose if the context is right, but in general, I think they can do it. It's not that they do a disservice. It's just there's only so much time. So what kind of value do you want out of your time?
it.
So, for instance, you can get on a leg press machine and maybe move the whole stack, but if you can't squat, it doesn't, it's not going to serve the same benefit as just cultivating the ability to squat. And, squatting is one of what I would consider the foundational human pattern. So, that's a little context around movement too that gets overlooked. So, if you look through the animal kingdom, there's this common thread where most animals they come out of the womb and they kind of already know how to move,
Right.
like they're running around by like the next afternoon or
A
something.
horse, right? It's incredible.
All right, but humans, we do this thing and we all do so it doesn't matter what century you were born or what continent you were born on. We spend the first year of our life about learning this developmental sequence. Like, how do we, in response to our environment, navigate this, meat suit through space? And we all do it the same way, and we do it through patterns. So, for instance, when a baby's on the floor and they're trying to get from their belly to their back, they roll over, and that's a pattern. It's that we call rolling. And it seems kind of simple, but there's so much magic in that pattern. There's so many qualities that are cultivated as we learn how to do that. And we all seem to know how to do it. And like, for instance, when you learn how to roll over, you're learning how to disassociate one leg from the other, which shows up later as we walk.
Mm.
We learn how to disassociate our spine from our hip. We learn how to really control our head in space by being able to control the production of flexion and extension of our spine and rotation. So there's like all these little qualities that we all do, and nobody's telling us how to do it. And children are always like our best teachers. So if you watch a child through this developmental sequence, they're basically giving you the fountain of the youth. Like, they're giving you the equation. All
Mm.
you have to do is kind of do what they do, because that's how we all originally learned how to move. So putting yourself in an environment that is basically that same environment, you could kind of go through that same process. So for instance, other patterns that are kind of constant across the species, once you've learned how to roll over, eventually you build up onto what's considered like a quadruped position, being on your hands and knees.
Right.
And most people will be familiar that the importance that it is to allow a child to develop to crawl. And that's like our first larger form of locomotion where we could really cover some ground. And again, there's a lot of qualities that are developed there. One, we're continuing to control our head in space. You got to keep your head up to kind of see where you're going. It's basic survival. You're also developing this contralateral patterning where we have opposite limbs that kind of move together, like your right leg and your left shoulder will extend or flex together, which is, and you're also continuing this development of generating force, which generally happens from the center of the body
Mm.
and then moves out and transferring it and applying it. So in general, what happens when we move? We generate force and we apply that into the ground. And then Newton taught us that the ground pushes back. And
Mm-hmm.
then in the managing of our posture, we're transferring that force through our trunk generally. So there's this relationship between our hips and our shoulders. And then that force is applied usually to whatever our hand is touching. So like when you're crawling, it's back into the floor through your hand. Or if you're throwing a baseball, it's, you're generating force from your hips, you're pushing down, force is coming back through the body, and then you're channeling that into the baseball. So that's always going on.
Yeah,
But this groundwork is where the magic is. So, being on the floor, learning how to roll over, and there's lots of variations of how to do this, and there's different things to focus on it. But rolling is this very powerful pattern that we've all done, and we could all relearn how to do.
mm-hmm.
Crawling also.
Right.
And then we get standing. And there's three patterns that are kind of foundational to being a human once you get to the standing position. One we're all very familiar with. It's walking, or sometimes referred to as gait.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously our primary form of locomotion. And then there's
Probably
two
the
ways.
best. It's probably the best exercise.
Oh man, you could heal a
I mean,
lot
it's aligning.
just from taking a walk, for
Right.
sure. Yeah. And then there's two ways that we go from like high positions to low positions. So one we've already referenced is a squat. So it's a resting position, it's an evacuation position, and if you move well, it's a fairly comfortable position. For a lot of people, they feel like it's not for them. But I've never seen a human that wasn't able to adapt and kind of regain that function.
The ability
Some
to squat.
folks it's slow. Yeah, yeah. You could
I,
always improve it.
I mean, best, worst. It's kind of a silly statement, but I mean, I think if walking is the best form of exercise, I think the squat is top three. I mean, it's right.
Well, it's foundational. I would look at all five of these as top five.
Top five.
That like if you're going to do something as a daily practice, do a little bit of these five patterns. And the fifth pattern is another way we go from high to low, which is referred to as hinging. So one of these patterns is more vertical in nature. So when you squat, your center of mass is generally going straight down.
Mm-hmm.
There's it's not directly straight down, but it's fairly vertical in nature. And then the hinge is more horizontal in nature. So for instance, if you took a bunch of people from around the world and dropped like a pencil in front of them and said, pick it up, they'll send their center of mass backwards. There'll be a
Right.
posterior shift.
Mm-hmm.
And then, your torso will go from vertical to more horizontal, and you could reach something on the ground.
Almost like a
And
good.
that's generally going to be the path of least resistance. So,
Hmm.
if you were to pick up something heavy, that's generally the pattern. So long as you're moving well, that would come naturally. Now, when I say moving well, a lot of people lose these abilities because of the time they've spent in more unnatural environments, primarily like the chair, which is such an
Right.
integral part of our culture.
Sitting is the new smoking, they say.
Yeah, for sure.
So let me just get them down here because I want to.
Sure.
This is really great. It gives you a formation for exercise and things to do every day. So we're talking about something that involves some aspect of rolling, of crawling, squatting, walking, and what else?
And hinging.
And hinging.
And hinging.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
And you could really live on a recipe of just those things. But then
Right.
you could add, like, eventually you'll lose the environmental stimulus to create change. Like, when you take someone that hasn't been on the floor in a decade, they will get a lot of benefits from rolling around on the floor. But once they've done it, almost every day for a year,
They learn it.
there's obviously going to be a diminishing return there. So you'll need to provide more external stimulus for the
Hmm.
body to respond to. Um, but they could be, so what I like to do is, kill two birds, one stone. So when I'm looking at a, a warm up routine to prepare for more strenuous activity, I feel like those patterns are very powerful because you can literally warm up to prepare for something more strenuous. At the same time, you're working on this foundational quality of competency.
Mm.
So you're practicing getting better at something. So everything has this intention in it. At the same time, you're getting ready to do, some, let's say, heavier lifting, or maybe whatever your hobby or your,
Right. The
exercise
reward
of
in a way.
choice might be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So um, but it could also be like little movement snacks that you drip into your life also, where, okay, maybe I got 10 or 15 minutes. I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to take a yoga class,
Hmm.
but man, you could accomplish a lot by just kind of going through the basics. You'll always feel better after you dedicated, even a short practice to these
Right.
basics.
I think you were the one that told me. You go, I really like your videos because they're mostly like 12 minutes or so, little bite-sized pieces. You can just, okay, I accomplished something. If I want to do another one, I can. But I got something in.
Yeah.
It's
Now
yeah,
my workouts aren't that way. I'm definitely I get
yeah,
a little
mine are.
carried away with those.
But it's like when I give prescriptions to people, right? A medical doctor would give like, okay, here's a prescription, here's a chemical, right? I'm giving prescriptions of movement. Really, here's your prescription. This is what you do. This is what you take. You know,
Yeah.
and because movement's what's missing in your life. This is what's going to add. I mean, even you talked about crawling. A lot of behavioral therapists have like 10-year-olds that are having behavioral issues that never crawl because it helps the left and right hemispheres of the brain communicate with one another, and it helps with behavioral issues and social interaction. So they'll have 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds literally crawling as a part of their learning. That's helping their brain function. It's helping the way they interact with people. It really has legs. I would say we talked about the top part of the pyramid, incorporating all of it. I would say, pushing into balance is also really important. And skill acquisition, right? Whether, again, that's going to look different for everybody, but when you're acquiring a skill, me balancing on the ankle, drawing the alphabet with your toe or something like that, that can be difficult for people. And so it's an actual neurological skill. Your brain will actually secrete some brain-derived neurotropic growth factor and literally lay down some dendrites when you're acquiring skill. Something that's challenging, where the body is going, where am I? How do I do this? And sometimes, if I get a senior, I'll just put them, okay, you're going to be in the corner of a room, and you're going to have a chair in front of you, and you're just going to put your feet together, close together, and they're going to be like this. The chair is in front of them in case they go forward, they can catch themselves. The corner is in the back in case they fall back. But that can be a skill. For you, it's going to be balancing on one leg with your eyes closed doing a squat or something, because you're a master of movement. But
Well, you could take any pattern and put any focus you want. So, like, for instance, the gait is a really good one to work with for folks, especially when they're starting, because we're most familiar with it. So, like, if you take someone that has been on the ground in 30 years, crawling is going to be very unfamiliar because it might have been 60 years since they've crawled.
mm,
So, because we're more familiar, you could take a pattern like walking and you could add a quality that you're focusing on. So you could focus on the competency of it. So the motor control, the skill acquisition, the balance, however you want to frame it. How well do you control yourself in those three planes through this pattern on this day in this setup? And there's different types of stimulus that you could add to that, whether it's asymmetrical or symmetrical. You could add strength components to that by loading the body, whether it's, you're carrying weight in your hands, or you're putting weight on the body, or you have a head weight on, or whatever it is, or a rubber band pulling you from some direction. Or you could train capacity or duration, like how long, What kind of endurance can you cultivate in this pattern?
Mm,
And it could be expressed with speed also. Like, the full expression of that would be a sprint.
mm,
So you could take the pattern, and based on, who you're dealing with and where the low hanging fruit is, you could kind of determine what's best use of your time as far as what kind of environmental stimulus are we going to add to the organism while they practice this pattern.
mm-hmm. I
If
love
that
it. And
if
keep
that
it,
makes
it's beautiful. It's so well put. And also, right, keeping it, I think what you're saying is keeping it different too. Because I mean, it's easy like, hey, I do my 10 squats a day and I do my this and I get on my exercise cycle for 20 minutes a day. And, it's good. But in a few months, you're pretty much, okay, it's done. You're just using those highways, those pathways. It's adding that extra component, adding that, like you said, a band pulling you in one direction or a
or just more
balanced
weight.
or one arm or more weight, right? Anything, just doing it a little bit differently. Um, my wife does this. It's called Be the Method, and this gal, she does like Pilates and movement and low impact cardio and things like that. And I'm just amazed. I mean, it's just every time I do that with her, it's something completely different. The hand is moving differently. The, it's going back. I mean, she blows my mind every time. And she's actually getting me to do very simple movements, but my core is engaged, right? And I'm finding I just get out of bed. It's like, boom, somebody threw me out of bed in the morning. It's not. There's no zero effort there. You see that flight of stairs. It's not like I got to go up the flight of stairs. You're just like it just you're not even thinking about it. And then you feel all of a sudden if you tap in, oh my glutes are just throwing me up the stairs right now because you've done the work, and so your everyday existence becomes a flow, right? And it's
Yeah, you become stronger. We're like we spend a lot of time helping people meditate, and it's like what you practice grows stronger. So, like as you practice being, calming your system, you become a more calm person,
mm-hmm,
even when you're not meditating. So, same thing, like with exercise, as you practice getting stronger. So, let's say you're lifting weights in a gym environment or whatever, you become stronger. So, like later in the day, or especially over time, you're no longer in the gym lifting the weight, but yeah,
mm-hmm,
you are stronger. You will notice that life is easier. Things that are familiar become you notice, like that walking up this hill in your neighborhood used to feel like this, and now, boy, you don't really feel that strain. I mean,
mm-hmm,
the body does change. And it's nice to do different things, but I think more important for most folks, especially in the beginning or the majority of the months of the year, would be to really focus on the basics and just continue to get better because it's infinite. Like I talk about rolling from your back to your belly, and it seems like silly, but that's an infinite spectrum of quality. Like
mm,
you're chasing a ghost. Like just like when you draw two dots on a line, you could always squeeze another dot between those dots. It's infinite.
mm,
So the ability to roll from your back to your belly, you can always get better at that. It might sound simple, or whether it's squatting, whether it's walking. I mean, walking is inherently asymmetrical. So, like, if you look at our organ systems, there's a lot of asymmetry. If you look at our lymphatic system, lots of asymmetry.
right.
So like it's very common for people to walk, and have some kind of wonkiness to it. Like if you were to close your eyes and take a
Mm,
walk, it's not going to take long before you're going to steer right or left. Like
mm-hmm,
nobody's perfectly symmetrical. So like there's always room to improve on the very basics. And most people are just really under strong. And you don't need to be like as strong as a football player, but you want to be strong enough relevant to what goals that you have.
mm-hmm,
And that's where you can make up like the most bang for the buck in a way. Like if you hold all the qualities constant with two people and
right.
one person's stronger, they're just way ahead of the
Strength,
other. So
right.
yeah. And um and it's very empowering. Like, we always hear stories, usually in the first few weeks of training, where, somebody did something that just felt easier. Whether it's, a common one is like lifting their luggage to the overhead compartment in the airplane. I used to have to ask somebody to help me do this. And then for the first time since I could remember, I lifted my own suitcase up. Like, things like that will happen, but they won't happen from lifting 5 pounds. Like, you have to identify, this is the quality I'm working on. I'm literally trying to find the appropriate stress so that my body adapts and becomes stronger. And that could be an art form. And if folks don't know how to do that, there's tons of people out there in the field of helping people do that.
Hmm. What
And
do you
now with
think? Have
what's
you
that?
have you have you gotten into the super slow at all? The super slow lifting?
Uh, I haven't, not super slow. I mean, I understand time under tension is a signal. So you need substrate to build muscle.
Hmm.
So that could be like the amino acids, like the raw substrate that our body uses. And then you need signal. So signal is both endogenous, which means like growth signal, like insulin or something, being in a caloric surplus, having the internal signal and substrate to make the thing you're trying, but also the exogenous, that stimulus. So a primary stimulus that drives muscle growth will be how much time your muscle is under tension.
Hmm.
So, you know, one way to accomplish that is to just by slowing down your reps.
Slowing down. There's a bodybuilder back in the day. His name is Serge Nubret. Gorgeous body, small waist, just really really well developed. And he was doing where you're doing one rep, you're doing two reps, take about 15 seconds, and whatever you're doing, and you're doing very low weight, and you're literally shaking. Um, and so I think the philosophy is, and maybe you can add to it, is when you're doing faster movements, sometimes the muscle's shutting down during that movement. It's not a pure 100% contraction the entire range of motion. But if you're going a little slower, you're actually contracting every second of that movement, right? Whereas, so he'll do one set will take a minute and a half. So you're doing 12 reps, and then you take 15 seconds off, and then you do another for a minute and a half, and you do six sets, right? And I've done it a little bit, and it's quite incredible, because you've got, whatever, 10 15 pounds in your hand, and you're just shaking and just trying to get that, and you're moving very slowly. It seems like it's safe, but is that going to transfer into taking the luggage and putting it up? Some people say yes, even though the luggage is heavier than the weight. Did we hack into the body, maybe for a compromised joint, where somebody can now go slower, lift less weight, and actually get similar benefit?
Yeah, maybe. But again, when you're putting the luggage up over the overhead compartment, is that how you move? So yeah,
Right,
I could be convinced
right,
that you could benefit somehow. Sure. But is there anything in your life that you would do that way? So
right.
like, do I want to train that way? Now, periodically for a different stimulus, if you're hitting some type of plateau and you've hit a real diminishing return in your
Mhm.
practice, which happens because the curve will change, the adaptation curve for sure. Um, but I mean, to me, I wouldn't do it. I mean, there's room for isometrics? Sure. Do
Right.
they serve a purpose? Yeah,
Right.
very similar. But I find it way more empowering to take, a 70-year-old woman and teach her how to pick up 150 pounds off the floor,
Ooh, great.
which I mean, they
Right.
can do,
No, I was with when we have five-year old twin girls, and my mom's in her 80s, and she's got these grandkids, right? And so I had her literally, I put the stroller down, and I would take a 15-pound, put it in the stroller, have her pick it up out of the stroller over and over and over again to repeat that movement, to give her the ability to, hey, I
pick
can
up a.
safely, because you're just, okay, we got an 80-year-old, I got my little baby, you know.
Right, right.
Right. So 80 stayed more like 85, but um So that was good. How do you mimic a little bit your everyday life? I
Well, it's
guess you
those
would call
five
that.
patterns because they're built in everything you do. So, like, let's say you take a daily activity, whether it's grocery shopping or maybe it's a hobby, like whatever sport you play, whatever the activity is, there's components of the five patterns within them.
Mm,
So you're talking about the basics. So if somebody does the basics well, you could teach them anything. It could be rock climbing, ballroom dancing, whatever it is. The skill doesn't really matter. If
right.
you have a base of competency, then you could pile strength and skill on top of that and without a large risk of like an injury or getting hurt.
Hmm.
So like to me that's always where to focus and then get stronger around those. So like if you um like deadlifting is a very powerful one. Squatting and deadlifting are great and also various forms of gait where you're like carrying weight. They have so much to offer because they make you strong all over. Like if you get better at picking a heavy weight off the ground, even though maybe your hands don't even reach the height of your waist, it's still going to translate to pick a small child up out of a stroller, even though the action in the gym doesn't look like that action in life. Like we'll see football players come to the gym and they try to make their exercise look like football, but they don't need to. They just need to get better at generating, transferring, applying force through their body
Hmm.
through some like very, real pattern. And you can do that through different directions and different planes. They don't need to make it look like football. They just train the concepts and then go play football.
Mm.
So like if you take someone that's frail and they're let's say they're 60 and they haven't really exercised since they were young and you teach them to pick 40 pounds off the ground
Hmm.
within a week that 40 pounds is going to feel like 30 and you're going to be able to put 50 and it's going to feel the same.
Ooh.
The adaptation just happens as long as they're getting reasonable rest and adequate nutrition. The adaptation will take place, and for a while they will continue to hit strides. It will be a while before they level off. If they're coming right from the couch or something, they will make progress every week for a while, like sometimes many, many months. So if that lift goes from 40 pounds to, let's say, 90 pounds over the course of 3 months, everything in their life just got easier,
It's
even if it's just walking down the street and
right,
looks
right.
nothing like the activity that they were doing in the gym.
Right, right. And if they're picking something off the ground, they're using their major movers, their legs. So they're getting, when you're doing squats and things like that, you're getting a hormonal charge too. You're getting
Yep,
growth hormone and
yep.
testosterone. You're helping every other muscle in your body, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's that endogenous signal that you are cultivating by your practice, for
Hmm.
sure.
I'm inspired. Let's go
Yeah,
do some.
just like the BDNF you mentioned, like you can cultivate the ability to lay down new neural pathways from your actions. Like if you're used to brushing your teeth with your right hand, you switch to your non-dominant hand. Your brain will start going like, "Oh, we need some new infrastructure here. We need
Hmm.
new neural pathways," and your body will upregulate its production of brain-derived neurotropic factors.
Right. You might want to
Like
not
I
shave.
skate. You mentioned skateboarding. I skateboard with my son. I mean, I say I skateboard. I'm not any good at it.
No,
He's
I
really good
skateboard with
at
my
it.
kids too. That's funny.
But I at least periodically I intentionally switch. I switch my stance
I do the same
because
thing.
it's
I feel
it
so
makes my
lame at it.
brain go crazy.
Right, right.
But when I'm done, there's like something calming about it. Like it feels really good for me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that we could do that could really change what those endogenous responses are, what those adaptations are.
Have you played ping pong with your left hand or your opposite hand?
I haven't done that. Don't play. I only play ping pong when we're on like some vacation that happens to have a table or something. We don't
Right,
want to.
right. It's fun. Yeah. You're feeling all wonky and then you're okay. Wow,
Yeah,
your
I
brain
bet.
is focusing. You're accessing things that you normally don't access.
Yeah.
So I'm
So
inspired.
I love like how do you devise all the qualities, all these things, whether it's, incorporating your hobby like ping pong along with squatting and deadlifting and daily routines. And how do you like comprise that into a program that somebody could used so there's like a scaffolding, there's like a structure
Mm-hmm.
that you could just kind of lean on. And through that practice, you're really just cultivating a stronger relationship with yourself. And then what I really love to see is how that affects your outward relationships, like how developing that stronger relationship with yourself through that movement practice shows itself in the way that you speak to other people, the way you interact with your environment or nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a beautiful process to allow it to
Mm-hmm.
unwind.
It's true. It's amazing how just inputting that into our nervous systems and into our it becomes a part of our subconscious, and even our subconscious is really doing most of our communication. My raising our kids, really, they say it's on a most of what you're transferring to them is completely nonverbal. It's your posture, it's your attitude, it's your breath, it's your fears. You think that you're doing that workout. Oh, I got my workout in, but really you're giving that workout to the people around you, because now you've up leveled your communication, your energy level. Energy is the currency of existence. And so when you're able to exchange that currency with other people, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not tired and, oh, how do I get out of this chair? You're a giver now. You're able to give and love in the world to everyone around you. So really, that exercise is it's not isolated. It's bleeding and spreading, to everyone in your sphere.
Yeah, absolutely, for
Yeah.
sure.
I love it. I'm inspired to move. So give me the five again. I want to get these down.
Okay, so rolling, crawling, walking, hinging, squatting. And there's some other like hybrid patterns that are useful for sure, especially as an adult, but you won't really see them in the developmental sequence. You won't see a 6-month-old do them, but they're useful. So like hinging on one leg, like you'll see an old guy pick his golf ball out of the hole with that commonly, where you're basically going through a hinge pattern, but one leg stays fixed in its relationship with your torso. And you could also do squatting variations. You know, not you could do all these things that foundationally you'll see with two legs. You could do them unilaterally also to build competency. And then, like a lunge is another example. Like you won't see a 6-month-old lunge, but it's very useful activity for sure. So as an adult, it definitely, you can make a good argument for those patterns to be in a program. But the five real basics are rolling, crawling, walking, hinging, and squatting. And
Hmm.
some people look at pushing and pulling as patterns. And my school of thought is more those are activities, and within them, there are patterns. So, for instance, another example of context, like if you think of a push up, people generally know what a push up is, but I would look at that as pushing comes from gait. So, if you think of like a very raw form of pushing, so let's say there was a car in neutral that you were trying to move from one end of the driveway to the other, and you
Hmm.
put your hands on the bumper, and then you set your legs up to actually move this thing. You'll stagger your legs, so it'll represent kind of a gait position.
Mm.
So my questioning would be, well, what goes on in gait? Well, we're generating force from our hips down to the ground. Force comes back by controlling our posture and our spinal position. Essentially, we're transferring that force through our trunk and then applying that through the shoulder girdle into the hands, into the bumper. So that's the thing that goes on in gait. So when you look at a push up, the question is, how do I express that concept through this activity called push up? And it dramatically changes how you do a push up. Like one is just some, I don't want to say mindless, but it's just an activity where you're doing this thing with your arms, your body's going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And one, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see there's a sense of quality to it, where you're taking the concept, okay, I'm generating force from my hips, I'm driving down through my legs. And the more your legs are involved with your push up, the cleaner that push up would be. The more you'll be able to control your spine because there's a force that wants to extend the spine as you go horizontal in a push-up position. Gravity wants to
Mm,
extend your spine.
mm,
And as you try to transfer the force through your arm, that gets exaggerated. So you might see a break in posture. So the ability to manage that posture is really taking those concepts that happen every step we take and applying it to this activity. And then the direction would be, am I doing that in a way that actually serves me on my journey?
mm,
Meaning, like, I could do that. And maybe if I do it with 20 pounds on my back, I could do it in a way where I'm kind of better off for it. But if I do it with 40 pounds on my back, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just doing something and now I've lost the direction of my program and I've lost the context around the things that I identify as what I value as far as long term quality of life.
So
So we're always juggling the
you're tapping
context
in too.
and the direction.
So here comes your name, right? The mindful movement. You're tapping in. You're doing that push up, and you're logging into, your legs. Legs, how we doing, right?
Yeah.
Core, glutes, right? And
Yeah.
creating an incredible push up.
Yeah, I don't think as the parts so much as like the more global task. So, for instance, I wouldn't say like get my glutes involved with the push up. I would think more of apply force through my legs. And so, like, as you extend your hips, the muscles that are hip extenders should, in theory, if we're, moving well for competency there, should turn on.
Mm,
Because to generate force through your legs, you're going to extend your hips. So things that are primary hip extenders, they should just naturally do their thing. They should come
mm,
on board. And sometimes they don't. And that's where maybe some corrective exercise, sometimes muscles can be shut down due to trauma or injuries or,
right.
pain will shut down structures for sure. So there's a place for either corrective exercises or third parties like chiropractors or physical therapists to, help encourage the body to come back online
Mm.
so that it operates, a little bit more in line with its design.
I like that. More global cues.
Yeah, we find that folks do better with more, yeah, tasks like push down, go forward, head up, eyes forward, instead of thinking in terms of parts like activate this,
Right,
flex this.
right, right. I love it. And that's more realistic. That's more functional. That's more everyday.
It's more real to like how we really get around. Like if you think about what we've evolved to do is to survive. So what did we do to do it? We had to find food. We had to build shelters, move shelters, forecast weather, fight battles, build, make clothes, like
Hmm.
hunt, forage, all those things. I doubt that any of our ancestors were like, "Oh, you're going foraging? Don't forget to work your glute. Like, don't forget to flex your glutes when extending
Work
up
your
the
biceps.
hill."
Right, right.
Yeah. So, not to mention it's that could really detract, I think, from quality of life when you're walking down the street and instead of like taking in the beauty of the surroundings, you're like, you know flex my calf to push myself forward, or
Right,
it's
right,
not.
right, right. Somebody said that, God said, take a walk, and the devil said, we're going to turn this into exercise. I mean, there's a point where, there's a point where you just enjoy walking down the street,
Yeah.
right? It's not like work it, that kind of thing, right?
Right, right, right.
I have a brother that was a really competitive bodybuilder, and so he got me into, like, and a chiropractor. He got me into very much compartmentalizing also, and that's a bodybuilder mentality, you know,
Yeah.
flex your
Oh,
glute.
and you know what? If you're paying your bills with it, all bets are off. I mean, if you're competing, and you want to make a muscle look a certain way, I mean, definitely no judgment here. It's great.
Right.
But there's an organization out there that says it well. It's called Strong First, and they're like a large certifying body in the like strength and exercise world. And they say it best. They say it well. Like you could be anything you want, but be strong first. So
Mm,
we've had young football players come into the gym and they want to get big, but they're weak. So like just get strong and then decide if you still need to get big. And usually in the process of getting stronger, you get a good bit bigger. and then you've lost that desire. Now, some sports, you need to be big. There's value in being in bigness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a thing that you can do. And in bodybuilding, there's value in using machines and, isolating certain muscle groups to make them look a certain way. There's an aesthetic to it. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's fine. Those people are not worried about. Like, I'm not worried about someone falling victim to a nursing home because they're using machines more than necessary or something like that.
Right.
Speaking to the average person of like, I want to feel better than I do now, I don't know exactly what step to take. And I like to say, hey, try this step.
Let's
Try
get
getting down
strong.
on the floor and rolling around and seeing
Mm,
how that feels. See if you
right.
could get up off the floor.
Play Lava Monster with your kids, you know.
Yeah, play Lava Monster for
Right.
sure.
It's such a treat to talk to you. We could go on for hours. I really appreciate you coming here and have a conversation. I'm inspired to move more. Just let us know how people can, contact you and what you
So
offer.
the mindfulmovement.com is the site that my wife and I run. And I do offer one-on-one coaching. I don't do a lot of it right now, so it's not up and available on the site. But if you contact us through the website, we can see if it's a good fit. And that's usually done in like 5-week increments with like a weekly call where you're getting some lifestyle tips based on where you are right now to try to meet you where you are. And there's a large exercise component to that where a program becomes developed that's highly personalized. But also on our YouTube channel, there's plenty of just very easy, gentle introductions to how to get down on the floor and roll around and enjoy your practice with a very low risk of injury because of the nature of the videos. We don't put anything very strenuous on the page.
Oh, wonderful. We all need it. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you, Adam. This
I
has been great.
appreciate it. All right, Les. I think I'm gonna call you and get that coaching.
Oh, that'd be great.
All right. Take care.
Bye bye.
Cool.
Thanks, man. That was a lot longer than you expected. Hope that's all right.